Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for another panel discussion. Um, these days, I'm trying to bring, the best of experts in the world, very diverse panels to talk about interesting topics that are super trendy and relevant. And I'm very excited to have a great panel of speakers from different countries. Um, I'll very soon add them to the broadcast, and we will start it. But right now, I would like to see where the audience are from. I would like to hear from you, and wait a little bit until everybody can join and start the conversations. We are super excited to be here with you guys. It's 10 p.m. In Sydney, Australia. It's a little bit late, but I'm very excited to be here with you. All right, let's see where people are coming from. Hello, Ayush. If I'm pronouncing it right, hopefully. Yasmina from Algeria. And also we got Iman from Tunisia. We have people from all over the world. Prince from India. Where else we are getting? Hello from Chicago. It should be super early there. And Muhammad from Indonesia. That's awesome. We have also from India, Yamini, and Sharuz from Turkey. Cool. Azerbaijan. Sri Lanka. That's great, guys. That's great. It seems that our audience are pretty much as diverse as our speakers. So it's great. The topic today, as I said, it's about smart cities. And, smart cities is actually a very interesting topic because we're all kind of involved in different aspects of a city, either using the public transport or education system or whatever facilities or services that we are using. Yet many of the public audience don't have a very deep understanding about these terminology and how does it work and what is the future. That's why we are putting this panel discussion, and our speaker is going to actually give you a very good understanding about it. We have some interesting questions that we got from you guys, and also we are going to check the chat if there is any other questions that we can ask during the conversation. So feel free, just share with us still where you're tuning in from. I would really love to understand our audience more, and also put your questions and comments in the chat. I'll be looking at it and try to put it in the between the conversations and ask the relevant speakers. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our amazing panelists today. So the first panelist is Heng. Hello, Heng. Can you please start by introducing yourself, telling us a little bit about your, I guess, your involvement with the smart cities, and also would love to hear a very short introduction about what is a smart city. Like, the public would like to get a good feeling of this terminology.
All right, thanks, Steve, and good morning and good evening to everyone online. My name is Han. I work for Oracle. It's a software giant, if you will. I run a business in Asia Pacific and Japan region. At the same time, I'm also an EXCO member of the Singapore Computer Society, where I'm involved in advising on IoT chapter, among other things. Now, my role in the company, obviously in Oracle, is to help customers solve problems as relates to technology and data. But in today's discussion, it's all about smart city, a very interesting and exciting area for me as well. I live in Singapore, and Singapore is truly a smart nation and smart city in Asia, one of the most livable cities here in Asia. Now, I think a smart city should be one that is super connected. Apart from modern buildings and nice infrastructure, not just the hardware, but also the brain and planning around the city, but also the hardware, hard as in from the heart, out from the heart, providing for the citizen. So I think a truly smart city is one that has goal of improving the quality of life of its residents, as well as improving and ensuring economic, social, and environmentally sustainable growth for our people in the world. So that's my view of a smart city.
Thank you very much. Our next awesome speaker from Switzerland, Ursula.
Hi, everybody. Great to be here. I look mainly from the smart city perspective in terms of aviation, transport, seamless connections, both for citizens, but also actually for travelers coming in. And also adding a little bit of completely new points, because a smart city, I think the horror story we all have in mind is it's just technology, but to make them more livable, more attractive, the smart city should have a soul, and it should actually be, everything should be easy, like everything should be 5 minutes away. And that's a key point, which I think illustrates what it can mean from the people's perspective, putting the people at the center and creating a more sustainable and livable, attractive environment.
Well said, Ursula. And our next member of the panel, Pratap, welcome.
Hi, Steve. Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm Pratap Padode from Smart Cities Council, India. India, as you know, is a large country, and for us, the Smart Cities mission was brought about by our current Prime Minister, Mr. Narendra Modi, in 2015. And rightly so, for our cities, the resources, the wastage which is saved is far more than whatever we can do for our cities, because this is a humongous amount of waste that is happening across. And for cities to be sustainable, they ought to work out a model whereby they can provide happiness, workability, livability, sustainability for the cities. So we have great challenges ahead. We have the Municipal Act to be revised, empowerment of the municipal commissioners. That's just the structure part. And of course, India has been able to, in the last 5 years, do a lot in this segment. We put a lot of money on the table as well. So I think it's an exciting time for smart cities, although the pandemic has shown us another side of this, which we will discuss later. Thank you.
Yes, for sure. We will definitely dive deeper in these interesting stuff. So our last but not least, we're having Pamela from US. Thank you very much for joining us, Pamela. It could be super early morning.
Yes, good morning. It's 8 o'clock, so it's not too bad. My interest in smart cities and the focus has been on security and privacy. As you know, that is a big concern. It's a complex issue and sometimes well understood, but not acted upon. So that's why I like events like these, where what we can do as security professionals is not just talk about what the issue is, but also what the remediations are. So I'm a founder member of IoT Security Foundation, which is a global consortium of IoT global professionals, as well as a co-chair for NIST Cybersecurity and Privacy Advisory Committee for Smart Cities. And speaking on that note of communities and what is a smart city, we have changed our name to SSP, which is the focus being on security and privacy, but for communities. So it's cities is included in that, for example.
100%. That's great. So I'll just want to jump into why we need smart cities. Like we all know about the technology, but what makes it important for us to think about and to implement for the cities?
Right.
Who would you-
Well, maybe I can start if.
Right.
So I think it is important now, as we know from a global trend standpoint. In about 30 years, by 2050, about 70% of the population will be living in cities, right? And this rise in urbanization is going to create a lot of stress to the government ecosystem. So we have to look at ways to provide for living, housing, transportation, and also having a very good government service for the citizens in order to make this a more livable cities in the future. Because smart city is all about planning for the future. It's not just for now, today. It's about 10, 30, 40, 50 years later. For the next generation of people, they must have a city that is well enough to live in as more and more people get to the city. So I think that is the reason why I think it's important now, more than ever, to have a plan for a smart city.
That's a good one. Yeah, Ursula, please.
Yeah, maybe just to add to what Heng has said, I think the pandemic also made it very clear that actually the current environment, the ways cities are being done, the ways the infrastructure, the transport works, is simply not sustainable. And this also given the growth in population, which is going to happen, but also in terms of well-being. And people suddenly discovered how fantastic working from home is, because they save lots of time in terms of hours which they were maybe sitting in or passing in traffic jams, the noise of a lot of this traffic, and so on. So they suddenly rediscovered as well, I think, the well-being aspect of this and the sustainability aspect much more as a focus.
So, Steve, may I?
Yeah, for sure. Go on, Pratap.
So I have a different perspective. I think that the way the population explosion has taken place in the last 100 years has never been before in the last 5,000 years. And the staggering force with which people have migrated to the cities have put just relentless pressure on these cities. And we've actually gone far past leveraging all the infrastructure that was created in the 30s and the 20s and the 40s and the 50s. We've actually breached all levels, and obviously there's need to reconstruct. And this time when we are reconstructing, obviously with the new reality of the information age, we have to ensure that we have data to assess what the citizens want, and we have the power to actually customize all such needs of the citizens very well than we could ever do before.
Totally right. Thank you, Pratap. We all know sometimes people think about like smart cities are kind of excluding the rural areas, and but that's not the reality. Like this is just for the audience. The smart cities is a I guess terminology you're using encompassing many technologies, and most of them can be used even in rural areas. It doesn't exclude the other part of the country from the cities. As also mentioned, like the transport is also something very important part of the smart cities, and I would like to get a little bit deeper on that part. Like, what do people think about city and mobility beyond the technology, and let's say how to design this mobility and smart transport to take care of well-being of the citizens and make sure they are happy? Ursula,
Well,
would you like to start?
Ursula?
Yeah. Thanks. I would like to give an example because I think sometimes citizens only realize it once there is change. And the pandemic is an example, but I would like to give the example of Ljubljana, which at some stage they had construction in the city center of Ljubljana in Slovenia. And the mayor actually decided that after 2 years of construction, the population was used to not being able to go by car into the city center and use the opportunity to turn this into a more sustainable approach, so into cycling, into having car sharing opportunities, so really being able on demand to use the service that you want to, but the ones which are also being good for you. So I think it's a good example illustrating it.
Great, thanks, Ursula. Heng, would you like to add anything?
Oh yeah. So again, in the context of the pandemic, and how this changed mobility in a big time, right? I used to fly every week. I fly on Monday out for my country. I'll come back on Friday. I spend the weekend with my family. But the last 12 months, in fact, 15 months, I've not flown. But what I realized is I walk more. I bought a bicycle so that I can cycle to the park. I see more motorcycles on the road now because they are doing a lot more delivery because people cannot go out. For many countries, they are locked down. Even in Singapore, where I stay, there's a heightened alert in some areas. So many people are not eating out, but they're ordering in. Now, when you look at how transport need to adapt to is how do we look at providing more public transport available, but also at the last mile. This is one of the challenge we face as we stay at home more. You want to go from one place to another. Not all the public transport bring you from one end to the other. The journey itself may mean that there's still a kilometer between the train station or subway to your house. So how do we solve that problem? This is an area that I think with the pandemic and with more and more people working from home, change of lifestyle, we need to figure out how the traffic system must be smarter. In many countries, for example, in Korea, for example, they now start to have driverless vehicle to bring people from one point to the other, or even supporting electronic vehicles where they have more and more charge points. So this to make transportation a lot more friendly, more easy, and bring you to the last mile. And I think that's something that I think should change as pandemic changes the mobility of people.
Yeah, and do you think that this change going to kind of be permanent, or how do you think things will evolve after this pandemic?
No, I think the pandemic, from my point of view, even in Singapore, where we have to some extent controlled the pandemic spread, but the pandemic will last for more than I think more than 6 months to a year. I think this will become a permanent thing going forward. I believe the pandemic will become the new normal. Frequent resurgence will become a normal. This is going to be the trend of the future, if you will. Now, many companies are now choosing to work from home. They realize after 1 year that working from home is just as productive. So why do you need to travel? So for instance, for us, we are not flying anymore. We can have meetings like today without having to travel half the world to meet each other. And I think this is going to be the new normal, and therefore you'll see more and more people living in the suburb. So transportation need to cater to not just the city transport, but how to extend to the suburb and provide the last mile transportation. This is going to be the new normal.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, Steve, may I?
Yeah, for sure.
I think pandemic has, really challenged the whole concept of smart cities in a way, because in smart cities, we used to measure the smartness of a city by the percentage of people who travel by public transport. And here we have a situation where now everybody wants a private vehicle because no more people want to feel safe in a public transport. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is that you can work from home because you have a network infrastructure. So people who are far away in tier 2, tier 3 cities are much smaller, and they actually migrated to the main cities in search of opportunities. They need not be around in the main city anymore. They can actually connect with not only in the same country but other countries and seek out opportunities, because it's going to be much more acceptable for people to give jobs across, as long as they can deliver online, and so many more opportunities. People sitting at home can actually deliver all across the world, depending on their talent and ability. So it's in some ways it's challenged it, and in some ways it's going to sort of turn it around. And I think, like Han said, it's going to be permanent, because this opportunity and this acceptance of meetings like this, and I don't have to really go down and meet somebody across, take a 2-hour ride to the airport, and then fly 2-3 hours, and again go to take another 2 hours there, and I can conduct this like this. I think unless it's very, very important, you're going to cut down. So it's going to be hybrid, of course, but a lot of such unnecessary travel and meetings will therefore concede, and a lot of new opportunities will emerge.
Can I just add something about, from the security perspective, what the threat landscape just exploded with this work from home and the largest global remote workforce ever created because of the pandemic. So in fact, the FBI was warning against the other coronavirus pandemic, which was the scams and the fraud, etc., prevalence, because now it just exploded, right? Everybody's online. And it's not just even a question of platforms such as video platforms for meetings and Zoom bombing, we heard about that, but other risks. For example, cities, so that's why, actually, as a NIST CPAC, we had created a COVID-19 task force for preventing security and bringing the awareness on what is the security and privacy issues. Everybody had a need to communicate, and everybody in offices, for example, and companies started using more of DocuSign, for example, for signing documents. And this led to a very, very targeted attack just on DocuSign, because now you had to sign online, you had to do things remotely. So you're using different tools, and therefore they became a bigger and a better target. So it's a good opportunity, as Pratap said, but opportunity for perpetrators and for everyone, not just the right side of the house.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really important topic to discuss in terms of smart cities, because by having smarter city, we're going to accumulate a lot more information and data about citizens in order to make a smarter decision making and take actions, and have artificial intelligence in place. And that means that you're going to be much more vulnerable in one side. So that's actually a great topic. And recently, you've probably heard about the ransomware attacks to US for the pipeline, and there was another one, meat company, and these are like $1 million kind of crimes that sometimes is not very, very easy to deal with. Still, I don't know what's happening. They're accusing a certain country to be behind it, but that's a reality of our smart cities life. So what are your perspective of it, and what do you think that would be the implications of having smart cities and a lot of data accumulated in the central places?
Yeah, my perspective on that is we can do this. We can address the security concerns, but we have to want to do it, because this is not rocket science as it comes to leveraging our existing know-how, all right? When I see something like a ransomware attack and a company not having a security professional managing the strategy of a company, it makes me wonder how how prepared are we for emerging risks from things such as a machine-to-machine decision-making and data accumulation at that level when we are not handling the traditional way of protecting ourselves with traditional systems. So when you bring in things such as artificial intelligence and IoT, you're talking about automation, and we want to see the value from these technologies. But in order to do that, we have to take a very, very pragmatic and a risk-based approach. So a perfect example of data accumulation and AI, for example, you were talking about is a Clearview AI, right? A database of publicly available scraped images in a database and being used by law enforcement, for example, or immigration, for example. Now, that is a perfect example of a protection and a risk-based approach, right? If you have you cannot automate certain things, for example. There has to be a human in the middle, right? So there's the data protection aspect, and then there is the risk-based application of taking a risk-based decision on the app, using the application. So these things are just going to multiply. But in terms of just the data protection, Steve, we have done that. We know how to do that, right? But it's the data protection and data lakes as we're creating more and more unstructured data. That is where the challenge is going to come. And we have to absolutely leverage what we have used in the past, the good foundational data protection 101, which is you separate out, for example, your network. You don't have your critical systems on the same network, flat network, easily accessible from malware that can get onto the network and then take the encrypt files and then we make them useless to you, right? Just doing a good data backup is not the answer for ransomware. And I've written an article on a checklist on what companies, even if they don't have a dedicated security task force or a personnel or a department, what they can do to protect themselves. Because if we don't do the fundamental things right, how are we going to get the advantages of advanced technology?
That's great. Thank you, Pamela. That's a really interesting topic. I would like to hear a little bit more about it from the other panelists if they want to add anything.
Yeah, maybe I'm allowed to add again. I totally agree with what Pamela said. With the new world of working, we used to have protection at the enterprise level, but now working from home, you have a lot of documents that you use at home. How well prepared are you able to secure your own PCs and notebooks and tablet? I think that's a big question mark. So I think for smart city, for a city to be smart, apart from all the things we talked about earlier, it's really to ensure that cybersecurity or security is not an afterthought as you plan for smart city. This must be a very important element going forward, because we are now, for smart city, it's connected city. And in a connected city, as Pamela talked about, there's a lot of emerging technology that enable it, IoT, sensors, so on and so forth. And then as a result of that, you have a lot of data, and data move around. And the question is, when you protect data, it's one thing, but data need to be encrypted so that even when people steal the data, they can't use it and use it against you to become, ransomware, like what you hear from US Pipeline as well as US Meat. So cybersecurity is going to be a key component of the roadmap for smart city. So I think this is an area that we cannot underestimate the importance of smart city. Just to add.
I would like to add, actually, first of all, a little bit of caveat. I don't think that just because of remote working and the changed patterns, security has become so important. All of these tools, and I think a lot of these problems existed before. So it's maybe accelerating, it's maybe getting more attention. But I would also like to point out the positive sides, and actually data have been collected, a lot of data have been collected about customers, about their behavior, and they have also been used in a lot of good areas, from understanding better customer preferences, being able to actually provide services in a much better way and improving the experiences, using technology to integrate much more the transport and making it easier to the customer, not knowing even if there are different parties behind, predicting queues beforehand, from traffic jams to, I think in Amsterdam as one of the projects which have been out there for years already. They discovered that they were actually duplicating a lot of public service activities like waste management, and they could reduce it and free the streets just as a result of this. So there are numerous, I think, positive examples. So it's more about the conscious management of this to actually ensure that data can be used for good.
Yeah, I agree with that. That if we take concerted and structured steps, we want to get the value from these technologies, because there's so much data being collected. We can't do all this humanly, collect the data and act upon it. It has to be automated. And how do we take those, how do we get there, is with going into it with the eyes open, know what the risks are and address them. And I absolutely agree that we want to make this doable, actionable, and not be a hindrance, right? So I agree.
Yeah, totally agree.
I'd just like to add, Steve, I'd just like to add one point to this. I think amongst all this, there is an issue of privacy. And like Ursula was saying, that so much of data of customers is collected. I think if the intentions are noble and good, obviously wonderful things can be done. There have to be safeguards. There has to be respect for privacy for people, and so there is a very thin line between when you think you're doing good for the customer and when you are invading their privacy. And the kind of devices that are going to be available gathering data is just going to be too difficult for individuals to actually keep track of where they have been offering signing agreements across on various websites saying I agree, and they haven't read those 300 pages of internet agreements, etc. And God knows what everybody's agreed to do and agreed to share. And that's where the big challenge is going to be. And some people, obviously not everybody is of that with that intention, and there is always the greed factor which allows some people to breach that thin line. And so one has to somehow come to some, I think, an overall understanding between countries about certain protocols that should be maintained.
Can I just add to that, Steve, about the kind of data that we are collecting, which we really need to be cognizant of? That's a great point. Privacy and security are really joined at the hip on this one. And the kind of data that for IoT devices that we are collecting right now, I'll give you some examples. Location, who you communicate with, details about your health, right? Utility usage, driving history, company production details. These are all also, when are you going in or entering or leaving a facility, for example. This is just a sampling of the kind of data that is already being collected. And let's not even go into devices, right? When you, for example, smart TVs, for example. I don't know if anybody remembers is Samsung, and it doesn't matter which company, because I think we are all, there are more than one. Let me just say that. But there was a warning that this particular company had given, that don't discuss anything confidential in front of your smart TV. And if you think about where smart TVs can be, that can be conference rooms, it can be your living room, it can be a bedroom, it can be a lot of very sensitive areas. Now, the problem there was they were collecting data for the right reasons, right, to Pratap's point. They were collecting data for customer user experience and customer management, but this was not being done properly with the right controls and safeguards in place, because not only were they collecting data without the user knowing, they were also sending it to a third party for analysis. So that is a big problem, right, as you can imagine. And that's where privacy can only become first and foremost in any of the smart city decisions. And we want, another area that is of very key interest for me is facial recognition and biometrics. But I'll come back to that if we have time and if Steve wants to.
Yeah, no, that's a great conversation to have, because this discussion about data is very important. The data sharing, the rights and the ethical, I guess, implications of having the data. I would just put another, I guess, question in about the data to our panelists, and that's about who owns the data and what kind of data should be collected, because some countries, I guess less democratic countries, are collecting more surveillance data, and then we do have some countries that are allowing citizens to actually own their own data and decide if they want to share it with public or government organizations. And that's like a two very extreme end, that one citizen can say, literally, my data, you cannot use it to plan your city, or cannot be leveraged to help others. And that I want to get a little bit of understanding about your views on this.
Yeah, I think this is all to do, if I may, it's all to do with the data quotient and data management. I think, as you said, different countries, different government have different ways of looking at data or collecting data. For us, as far as Singapore is concerned, I think the key is knowing that data in and around itself is going to be very important to drive a smart city, because you need data for a lot of citizen service and so on and so forth. Then the question is about data portability and open data concept. When you think about data portability, is where certain data you can port from one device to another. For example, if you want to change your mobile provider, you don't want to re-enter everything, and in fact you want to keep your phone number. How do you do that? That can be done when you have a clear data portability ability in your country. But again, your other data are provided, also protected. Not all the data are disclosed. And you look at open data concept, you also need to be able to provide some data so that people can use certain portion of the data will be able to be used and seen. Certain data will not be seen. So this comes to a circle of what we call data collaboration, getting all the data together so we can support a much better service to our customers or citizens. But at the same time, you need to have a data governance. All right, how do you manage the metadata? How do you ensure that there is data quality and data lineage management? Data privacy, we talk about data security and data protection. All right, and then obviously you need to manage data, because data comes from many sources, whether it's sensors, big data, social media, and put these all together. But the important thing is data must be made open, must be portable, in order to provide much better connected services. But at the same time, we need governance to ensure that some data can be used, some data cannot be used. Some data does belong to the government, some data belong to the enterprise, and some data belong to ourselves.
If I look at...
No, go ahead, Ursula. Go ahead.
Okay. Actually, if I look at aviation, transport, travel, this discussion about who owns the data, who owns the customer, has been going on for ages. And there have been some commercial kind of models in terms of trying to build loyalty programs, actually to get more data and get customers to agree and understand customers better. Airports and airlines realizing they could actually do more if there was a more common understanding. Because they didn't achieve it, airports started to also introduce loyalty programs. And in the end, it is the customer who decides where they give trust, where they actually get a really good service because it works. It's like Google. If I take the example just of Google, the Apples, Amazons of this world, where if every day as a customer, you actually see the benefit of having agreed to give your data, you will actually love it and you demand more and more. You don't accept anymore that something isn't going well. You don't accept anymore old algorithms which Amazon uses to offer you for the next 3 years the type of shoes that you were looking for once at this time and already bought a long time ago. And I think this is where, of course, also now on the technology side, a lot has happened. And this is where, from blockchain to other technologies, there are opportunities to also integrate much smarter so that the partners do not need to agree. The partners do not automatically access the data anymore, but technology allows actually to connect and create a seamless experience without all of this. So I think there are different angles to this question, but in the end, the customer, the person decides where they put the trust and what they expect, and they will change fast if they are not happy.
I just wanted to give my perspective on that, which is it's also risk-based, right? For example, a 911 service, right? You do want to collect certain data, and that is going to be important for the protection and safety of the citizens. But there might be other data that is more discretionary, if you want to call it that. And so data governance is also going to be dependent on the context in which we are applying the data and collecting the data. So yes, I think the onus is on that governance policy and the regulations, for example, and European Commission has produced some really good regulations, GDPR, for example. Singapore, the data protection governance program is excellent. So Australia, all right. So there are definitely, we have precedents, and definitely we are addressing it. I wish we were doing a little bit more in the US, so that's why I'm going country by country. But yes, I think data governance and a risk-based application of that governance is really critical.
So yeah, so Pamela did mention India, so let me say what's happening here. So there is a concern that yes, we entrust our data with the government, and for several reasons, the government is going to, sort of keep the trust. But they have this gray area where they say that if it concerns national security, or if it concerns, so what are the such circumstances which concern national security is a gray area. You can always cite communal tension is an area where there is need for you to breach that veil of secrecy or privacy and try to capture the data. See what purpose you're using the data. Like Ursula is saying, consumer preferences are very benign way of using data, but when you have racial discrimination, communal discrimination, and so on and so forth, gender discrimination areas, if you use it with a particular intent in mind, it can be disastrous. So of course, that gray area, I think we are still struggling with. There are still debates going on here in India on when can this veil of privacy be breached, on what kind of circumstances they need to be detailed out. And yeah, I mean, I would love to know how Singapore and others have actually done this part of the whole governance structure, because that's where we are at right now.
Pratap will be happy to share with you the Singapore data governance and open data and data portability framework separately.
I just want to mention one thing really quick, which is when we're talking about the new environment and we're talking about emerging risks and collecting a lot more data than we ever have, for example, and we're thinking about the risk coming from data, right? The existing problems don't go away. So I know, and I don't want to call Singapore out, but I know you had a problem with a medical database, right? The more data we collect, the traditional ways of protecting that data does not go away, right? We still have to do the traditional way of encryption you mentioned, right? How that's very important. Access control, right? The data segmentation, etc. All that still has to be done. But as we collect more and more data, what gets anonymized, what does not get anonymized, I mean, those are the things that have to be really carefully thought through at the beginning, because you can't go back in a data lake and start scrubbing data. It doesn't work that way, right? We know that. Also with AI, for example, even if you scrub data, the very nature of these systems, it can put things together based on other facts. So your privacy is a very, very deep concern and something that has to be done really systematically. I keep coming back to that systematic word, but we have to be structured and we have to do it right at the beginning, because it's not something you can do reactively, right? So now more than ever, security and privacy have to be a strategic decision going in, not after.
Yeah, thanks, Pamela. I guess now I'd like to actually talk a little bit about the other aspects of a smart city. And I guess that my next question is to Pratap, and it's about how can we put citizens in the front and center of designing in a smart city?
Yeah. So, I want to say that how India actually, there's a good case of we took LED lighting as a means of, actually making cities sustainable. And sustainability is one of the major concerns in cities in India, because for far too long, the municipal heads have been actually been given grants by the center, and the municipal heads have then, by utilizing the grants, been running projects for the cities. So there was never a two-way traffic, as in the citizens could not convey to the municipal leaders what they ought to be doing for them. So LED market, for example, lighting market, it grew 130 times within 5 years. Its sales grew from 5 million bulbs per year in 2014 to 670 million in 2018. And so it was like the saving that we managed to do is virtually equal to the whole of Denmark for a year. That's the kind of saving that happened. And even the price of an LED bulb is dropped from some 400 rupees to around 70 rupees. So in just 5 years. And the market share for LEDs grew dramatically, superseding all the incandescent bulbs and tube lights and everything else. So, this has really proven, and we gave a model, the Smart Cities mission gave a model of this kind to certain cities, and we had a company which actually invested in the capital expenditure of the bulbs, etc. And the cities managed to save power and pay back the capital expenditure incurred for setting up LED lights. So this was one very fantastic example of something that has just grown, skyrocketed from within 5 years, 130 times. And I thought I must bring this, that this kind of this is just one area, and there are several other verticals where dramatic scores have been created. So the benefits are immense once we apply this logic here.
That's great. But so, in general sense, we all believe that city is for citizens, and the problem is sometimes us as a technologists. I mean, some of us here are technologists. We would like to push technology forward, and sometimes we believe that public are not understanding what is actually necessary and relevant for them. But how can we actually make sure we kind of tap into the public opinion more for designing or for even deciding about the future of cities? And I would like to hear a little bit more. Heng, would you like to share your ideas about it?
Sure. So, for city to be smart, it's not just about the infrastructure, it's about the people, and it's about the citizen service and everything surrounding the citizens. And they should have a say in how the city will look like. But the fact is, today, if you look at, it's in itself part of the governance of the government, if you will. If you think about what's happening today in terms of the pandemic, how the government was able to, through contact tracing, through mass testing, to reduce the infection or spreading of the COVID-19, it's a way to show how well the government using data to help ensure that they know how to trace and provide isolation for people who are potentially exposed. This in itself will sort of reflect the happiness of the people for how the government has been able to manage the whole crisis, as an example. But when you look at smart city, as I said, it's all about the citizen. It's all about the human. So we had to be human-centric. When you look at building a smart city project, apart from the framework we talked about, it is really about PPP, right? Private and participation and government participation all put together. I spoke to one of the smart city planner in Asia, which is Taiwan, by the way. Taipei Smart City is one of the best smart cities, if you will, in Asia Pacific, and they recently won, together with Singapore, some of the IDC Smart City Awards. So when I talk to them, what they do is they always encourage citizens and private enterprises to participate in those projects. And in those projects, when they participate, they will ask for feedback from citizens. They look at the services that matter most for the citizens, and they provide investment in there. Now, the government will obviously be funding some of this investment. And if those projects will become very successful, they credited the success to the enterprises. Now, if the project is not a success, it's failed, the government will take ownership of that project, so that this will encourage more participation from the private enterprises and the citizens. I think this is one way to encourage more human, people-centric development for smart city initiative and project, in my view.
Yep, thanks, Heng.
Maybe adding to this, obviously, social media, community platforms, and so on, they do allow active participation, but the share is still very limited. So I think also as a city actually actively looking for where do I really find my customers, where do I really find the people, and how can I ask them, involve them, is, I think, a key issue. And I find one very interesting example. If you look at London's Natural History Museum, realize they actually have just, in the last couple of months, they've changed the management, and they've decided, to everybody's surprise, and I think it's exactly coming from having this access and more this people and customer thinking, they decided for the previous UK manager for Amazon to lead the museum. And they have actually realized that they have such a wide share of people, of the population really visiting the museum, that it is an opportunity to communicate with them in a completely different way, to get their input, how to create, for example, more sustainable living, how to create cities that really work for the people. And I think this is just one example. There are many other more creative ones as well, even setting up different kinds of models and having people share their experiences about it, to be able actually to then choose for maybe what is the way forward. In Switzerland, they do regular, they really have all of the population participating, so they do regular elections, and this is all done digital, in the meantime digitally, which also helps, where they really ask the people for their input, and this can be for small decisions or bigger ones, and the participation is very high because they have been used to this now for so many years. So I think it's also then a learning process, but there are huge opportunities to actually really do this.
That's right. Thank you very much. So it's great. We're kind of getting close to the end of our discussion. I'm going to just quickly go through the last question, which is about the future. And everybody is super excited to get your views of the future of the smart cities and how it will look like. I'm going to start with Pamela. Please share
Sure.
your views about it. Thank you.
So, being a security professional, I am very used to being an enabler for the business. In this case, we want smart cities to make lives better and fun and maximize our value from technology, and we can make it happen, right? So, just two things for that. One is at this CPAP produced is a risk management framework, which lays out the how to apply that framework, this cybersecurity framework to smart cities. And also at IoT Security Foundation, I chaired the development of a checklist for which is a very, very, very comprehensive and actionable checklist for IoT manufacturers and users. In fact, the city of New York used it for their IoT security program. So that is, we have to do it right, and we can do it. So I would say the tools are there and the know-how is there. Let's maximize it.
Awesome. Han, how about you give us an insight about what would be the maybe the future of the smart city in terms of technology or about the adoption?
Yeah. So, given Singapore is such a small country, such a small city, the only way for us to go is to go up. So the future, what I'm seeing in the next 20, 30 years is where everything is going up. We're going to have rooftop gardens. We're going to have vertical farming where farms are built on buildings to be more sustainable. And we're going to have, instead of highways that we see in Singapore, we're going to have skyways where, you have drones sending goods, and in something that's really prototype in Singapore. I think this is going to be the future where there's electric cars, there's electric drones flying around and delivering and sending people around. I think that could be the new future to come in a very small city state like Singapore.
All right. Ursula, we would like to hear about Switzerland.
Well, I would go beyond Switzerland and globally. And first, I start with traveling. And Heng gave the keyword urban air mobility. So there are already projects out there. Lilium, it's a German startup in this area. Airbus, there are globally more than 20 companies start working in this area. Lilium predict that in 2025, actually, when you want to go to the airport, you will use this flying taxi based on green energy. And this means, in the example of New York, you will be at the airport in 5 minutes instead of at least 1 hour, and you pay $70 for this. I think travel overall, if I just continue for a short moment with travel and transport, decisions will be done more conscious, and they will automatically be integrated. The technology is there. There are lots of startups working on this now. So from the customer perspective, you get your holistic experience automatically with your mobile device, and you just go for this and can take very conscious choices. You can also act much more on demand, much more flexible. And I think in terms of living in the smart cities, you can focus much more on spending quality time instead of having to go to the supermarket. You will actually have either your drone deliveries, and there are already several examples and tests about this, or you will simply actually have your on-demand shop, which even doesn't have a shop assistant and just comes at any time of the day when you want to go there. So there will be lots of less traffic, less time wasted with things which are not useful. There will be more robotics and AI, whether it's for cleaning, whether it's maybe even for company. There will be more co-working models and remote working models, and maybe even models like where people do change their living for a while, and suddenly even the energy companies need to adjust because their whole model today is just built on regular payments, and it should be more adjusted to. You might live in a city for 6 months and it should just be easy to change. So it will become easier from the customer perspective, and hopefully if there is an integrated view also from the government side and so on, it will not just be driven by the investors and the company perspective, but it will really create a new way of living and make the 5 minutes actually realistic.
Thank you, Ursula. Pratap, we would like to also hear your views of the future, and also what technology do you think, if you want to pick one, would be the most impactful in terms of changing our cities in near future?
So for India, sustainability is definitely high on the agenda for cities. We have so much more pressure coming on the cities. We need to be creating more cities, greenfield cities actually, to be able to provide more opportunities, because we have a very young population. And to really get the dividend from this demography, we need to provide opportunities. And of course, the network, providing them information network, has become a good equalizer for a country as diverse in terms of socioeconomic sectors for our country. And so this is actually a great leveler, where even a person from very humble backgrounds can really make it big, provided he's given the power of information technology. And that is a great source of hope for millions who are actually living below the poverty line, and so many are now coming out of that. Of course, the pandemic has really hit everybody hard, and what it has made us realize is that when you plan smart cities, you cannot ignore disasters, and which you, however smart you might be, and there are going to be disasters coming up, like the pandemic, many more, and you got to be prepared for that, because however smart you might have been, one disaster can actually undo everything good that you do. Coming to the technology which you asked me to pick, I think electrical vehicles is going to be the game changer as far as cities are concerned. India is also working very hard at this, and by 2030, I think a whole lot of European nations and many others, I think Southeast Asia and India, are going to convert. I think suddenly you'll see what is a combustion engine doing in my car, and why do cars need it, and what are we doing with petrol and diesel, etc. I think it's just going to be completely game changing in the next 10 years. I think iPhone came 14 years back, and maybe 15 years back Facebook came, and we never imagined, or even Google Maps, how they changed the way we use our car rides, etc., taxi rides. I think a similar big change will come with the electrical vehicles, is what I think.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, our awesome panelists. And thank you very much, our great audience, for tuning in from pretty much all over the world. We had people from different countries, at least I've noticed more than 20 or 30 different countries. And please come back for our future events. And thank you very much for your support. Have a good evening, night, or morning, based on the place that you're tuning in from. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve.